Have you noticed how suddenly everyone is whispering the same words online? Operation Sandman. It sounds like a military code name, like something out of a spy thriller or a Tom Clancy novel. But this is no fiction. The term has exploded across Twitter, Reddit, Telegram, and YouTube. Conspiracy forums are lighting up. Finance channels are going crazy. Even mainstream outlets are beginning to take notice, cautiously. But what is Operation Sandman? And why are people saying it could shake the foundations of the global financial system? Let's start at the beginning. The mysterious rise of Operation Sandman. The name itself isn't new. In fact, references to Operation Sandman have floated around for over a decade. But recently, something changed. A growing number of influencers, anonymous insiders, and even former government officials are hinting that this isn't just another wild internet theory. The core claim? That over 100 nations, many of them outside of the Western sphere, are allegedly planning to simultaneously abandon the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. The supposed goal? To deliver a financial death blow to what they see as American economic imperialism. If true, this would mark the end of the petrodollar era and potentially the collapse of US global dominance as we know it. But is there any truth to this? Or are we watching just another viral illusion? To answer that, we need to understand how the US dollar became the most powerful weapon in modern history. The weaponization of the dollar. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement crowned the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. That meant that most international trade, especially oil, had to be settled in dollars. This gave the United States unmatched power. Over time, Washington learned to use the dollar not just as money, but as a weapon. Through sanctions, swift exclusions, and control of global banking infrastructure, the U.S. could punish enemies, reward allies, and project dominance without firing a shot. But here's the problem. Other nations started to notice. And they didn't like it. Especially not after 2022, when Russia was kicked out of SWIFT and had its foreign reserves frozen overnight. That move, intended to isolate Moscow, sent a shockwave through the rest of the world. What if we're next? That was the quiet question whispered in Beijing, in Riyadh, in Brasilia. And that's where Operation Sandman comes in. As sanctions tightened and the U.S. weaponized the dollar more aggressively, many nations began searching for alternatives. China, Russia, Iran, and even longtime U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia started quietly making moves. Trade agreements denominated in local currencies, gold-backed settlements, bilateral deals cutting the dollar out completely. It was subtle, quiet, but coordinated. And then, the whispers began. Operation Sandman, they said, wasn't just a vague rebellion. It was a timeline, a coordinated plan, years in the making, to destroy dollar hegemony in one synchronized strike. The theory goes like this. At an undisclosed date, some claim it's already been set, a coalition of over 100 countries will announce that they are dumping U.S. Treasury bonds and will no longer accept dollars for oil, gas, or major exports. Simultaneously, imagine what that would mean. Trillions of dollars flooding back into the U.S. economy, triggering hyperinflation, global panic in the bond markets, a collapse in the dollar's value, and most importantly, a massive power shift away from the West toward a new multipolar world. Sounds extreme? Maybe, but the pieces are there. BRICS, gold, and the rise of a new order. Let's talk BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now a growing list of new applicants: Iran, Argentina, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and more. They've already announced plans for a new trade currency, potentially gold-backed, that could rival the dollar. They've begun creating their own payment systems, like CIPS in China, to bypass SWIFT entirely. And they've been hoarding gold at a historic pace. Why? Because if you want to kill the king, you don't fire a bullet. You undermine his foundation, slowly, silently, until the throne crumbles on its own. That's the theory behind Operation Sandman. Not a war, not a coup, but a reset. A strategic shift away from one empire into something new. But what happens to the average person when a global currency collapses? That's where things get truly terrifying. Let's imagine for a moment Operation Sandman actually happens. Overnight, the dollar is no longer the primary global reserve currency. Petrodollar agreements vanish. Foreign nations stop buying U.S. debt. Trillions of greenbacks come flooding back into the U.S. economy. What happens next? First, hyperinflation. Basic goods skyrocket in price. Gas, food, electricity. The average person watches their savings evaporate. The dollar in your wallet? Worth less with every passing day? Second, panic. Markets crash, Wall Street freezes, banks impose restrictions. The government scrambles to stabilize a collapsing system. Third, control. New emergency measures are introduced. Central bank digital currencies, price controls, restrictions on foreign currency. Capital flight becomes a crime. And through it all, people ask the same question. How did this happen? Well, maybe it was always coming. Maybe the world was just waiting for the right moment to break free from a system built on debt, war, and control. Is Operation Sandman real? Here's the truth. There's no official confirmation that Operation Sandman is a real coordinated effort. No leaked documents, no formal announcements, but the behavior too of governments around the world, it's pointing in the same direction. De-dollarization is not a theory, it's already in motion. So whether Sandman is just a symbolic name for this global pivot, or an actual synchronized takedown, the outcome may be the same. The question now is, are you prepared for a world after the dollar? Because whether it arrives with a bang or a whisper, change is already underway. To understand how serious this could get, we need to look at historical precedents. Because this wouldn't be the first time an empire collapsed under the weight of its own currency. Think of Rome. At its peak, Rome controlled vast territories, collected tribute from the known world, and minted the dominant currency of the time, the denarius. But over time, the empire debased its own currency to fund endless wars and internal corruption. Eventually, confidence collapsed, trade dried up, the military weakened, and the empire fell, not with an invasion, but with an economic implosion. Sound familiar? The US may not be Rome, but the symptoms are eerily similar. Unsustainable debt, endless military engagements, a global currency losing trust, internal polarization, and unrest. Now combine that with digital technology, algorithmic trading, and real-time media. If Operation Sandman or something like it were to happen, the speed of collapse could be exponential. We wouldn't have years. We might have days. Maybe even hours. The real message behind the fear. Some analysts argue that the Operation Sandman narrative is not a literal plan, but rather a wake-up call. A metaphor for what happens when a system abuses its position for too long. The dollar was once backed by gold. Then it was backed by oil. Now, it's backed by confidence. And confidence is fragile. If enough people, or nations, believe the dollar is no longer safe, that belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the fear isn't just about what's real. It's about what people believe is real. What you can do now. Whether Operation Sandman is fact or fiction, one thing is clear. The world is changing. Fast. Here are a few practical steps people are quietly taking right now. Diversifying assets into commodities, precious metals, and alternative currencies. Reducing reliance on the banking system. Educating themselves about financial history, monetary policy, and global trends. Preparing for scenarios that once seemed impossible. Because at the end of the day, it's not about fear, it's about being informed. When the rules of the game change, the people who understand the new rules early are the ones who thrive. So stay curious, stay skeptical, and watch closely. Because the next whisper you hear might not be a rumor. It might be the future knocking. There's one last thing to consider, and it might be the most important. Whenever a dominant currency falls, it's never just about economics. It's about power, culture, identity. The fall of the British pound signaled the end of the British Empire. The end of the French franc reshaped European power dynamics. And if the dollar goes, what comes next? Some argue it will be the Chinese yuan. Others say a BRICS-backed gold note. Some even imagine decentralized digital currencies rising from the ashes. But the real answer might be no single replacement at all. Instead of one global reserve currency, we may be heading into a fragmented world of competing systems, where trade, influence, and wealth are negotiated in regional blocks, not dictated from one central power. In that world, adaptability becomes the ultimate asset. The people, companies, and countries who can pivot, who can let go of old systems and embrace new ones, they will not just survive, they will lead. And perhaps that's what Operation Sandman really signals. Not the end of the world, but the end of one world and the birth of another. So if you've made it this far, remember, this isn't about fear-mongering. It's about awareness, because the people who stay asleep during historic shifts are the ones who wake up too late. Stay awake, stay ahead, and ask yourself, when the Sandman finally comes, will you be ready?